He had not planned for the day to stretch this long. By the time he reached the airport, the sky outside was already dark, and the bright white lights inside the terminal made everything feel even more tiring. He carried one small suitcase in one hand and his phone in the other. His shoulders felt heavy, not just from a bag, but from the week he had just survived. At home, his 7-year-old son was staying with a neighbor for the night. It was the first time in months that he had agreed to travel for work. He didn't like leaving his child behind, even for one night. But the extra pay for this business trip would cover school fees and maybe even fix the old washing machine that had been making strange noises for weeks. He checked the time again. The flight was delayed by almost an hour. He sighed quietly and found a seat near the charging station. Around him, people were talking, laughing, complaining, scrolling through their phones. Some wore expensive suits. Others looked like students heading back to college. A young couple argued softly over something small. A mother tried to calm a crying toddler. He leaned back and closed his eyes for just a moment. He thought about his son's face when he left that morning. "Will you bring me something from the airport?" The boy had asked, trying to sound serious. "Only if you promise to sleep on time," he had replied. The boy had smiled and hugged him tightly. That hug stayed with him the whole day. A loud announcement broke his thoughts. Boarding had started. He stood up slowly and joined the line. His body felt tired, but his mind refused to rest. There were always numbers running through his head. Rent, bills, school projects, groceries, savings. Being both father and mother meant there was no one else to share the mental load with. Every decision mattered. Inside the plane, the air felt cool and dry. He found his seat near the window and placed a small suitcase in the overhead bin. He liked window seats. Looking outside helped him think. It also meant he wouldn't have to get up if someone needed to use the restroom. He sat down and sent one last message. "Boarded. Be good. I love you." A reply came almost instantly. "Love you more." He smiled without realizing it. A few minutes later, someone stopped beside his row. "Excuse me," a woman's voice said politely. He looked up. She was dressed in a simple but elegant outfit. Not flashy, but clearly expensive. Her posture was straight, her expression serious. She carried herself like someone used to being listened to. But up close, he noticed something else. Her eyes looked tired. Not the normal kind of tired. The kind that comes from pressure. He stood up slightly to let her pass. She took the aisle seat beside him. "Thank you," she said, placing her laptop bag carefully under the seat in front of her. He nodded. "No problem." That was all. He didn't know who she was. To him, she was just another passenger trying to get through a long day. She opened her laptop almost immediately. The bright screen reflected in her eyes as she typed quickly. Her fingers moved with speed and focus. Every few seconds, her phone buzzed with new messages. She ignored some, answered others. Once, she pressed her fingers to her temple as if fighting a headache. He tried not to look, but it was hard not to notice how tense she seemed. The plane began to move. The safety instructions played in the background, but most people barely listened. As the engines grew louder and the aircraft lifted into sky, he felt a familiar pressure in his ears. He looked outside at the city lights growing smaller. Beside him, she was still typing. About 20 minutes into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. The steady sound of the engines filled the silence. The seatbelt sign remained on as the plane passed through a few small bumps of turbulence. She finally closed her laptop. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the seat in front of her. Her shoulders dropped, like someone who had been holding themselves together all day and could no longer pretend to be strong. He turned slightly toward the window again, giving her space. She adjusted her seat a little and leaned back. He thought she would go back to her phone. Instead, within minutes, her breathing changed. Slow, even, unaware. He didn't notice it at first. He was busy checking an email from his manager. But then, he felt something light against his arm. He froze. Her head had tilted to the side, and now it rested gently on his shoulder. For a second, he didn't know what to do. His first instinct was to move. Not out of anger, just surprise. They were strangers. This wasn't something that normally happened, but he looked down carefully. She was completely asleep, not pretending, not resting her eyes. Truly asleep. There was a softness on her face that hadn't been there before. The tension was gone. The tight lines around her mouth had relaxed. She looked younger somehow. More human. He hesitated. If he shifted suddenly, she would wake up. She already looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. He thought about all the times he had fallen asleep sitting upright beside his son's hospital bed when the boy had the flu last winter. He remembered how exhausted he had been, how even 10 minutes of sleep had felt like a gift. He slowly adjusted his own posture instead. Just a small movement to make sure her neck wasn't bent in an uncomfortable way. His arm began to feel awkward, but he didn't complain. He placed his hands together in his lap and stared straight ahead. A flight attendant walked past and paused for a brief second, noticing the scene. She smiled softly, then continued down the aisle. He could feel the warmth of her head against his shoulder through his shirt. It was not heavy, just present. Minutes turned into half an hour. His arm started to go numb. He shifted very slightly again, careful not to wake her. He thought about how strange life could be. Two strangers from completely different worlds, sitting side by side at 30,000 feet, sharing a silent moment neither of them planned. He wondered what her life was like. The laptop, the constant messages, the serious face. She seemed important. Maybe she ran a company. Maybe she was heading to a major meeting. Maybe hundreds of people depended on her decisions. And yet, right now, she was just a tired human being who needed rest. He looked around the cabin. Most passengers were sleeping. Some watched movies with headphones on. The soft glow of screens lit up the darkness. His phone vibrated quietly in his pocket. He carefully slid it out with his free hand. A picture had arrived. His son had sent a photo of the dinner the neighbor made. A simple plate of rice and vegetables, with a thumbs up in the corner. He smiled again. He wanted to reply with a voice message, but he didn't want to disturb the woman sleeping beside him. So he typed instead, "Looks good. Proud of you." He put the phone away. Another small bump of turbulence shook the plane lightly. She stirred for a second, her fingers twitching as if reaching for something. Without thinking, he steadied himself so she wouldn't slip. She settled again. His shoulder now carried more than just her head. It carried a quiet trust, even if she didn't know it. He realized something in that moment. Kindness doesn't always come with big actions. Sometimes it is simply choosing not to pull away. His arm felt completely numb now. Tiny pins and needles spread through his fingers. He tried to distract himself by looking out the window again. The clouds below looked like soft waves under the moonlight. He thought about how his life had changed over the years. There was a time when he felt lost and alone after becoming a single parent. People had offered advice, some had offered sympathy, but very few had offered real support. He had learned to rely on himself. But he had also learned something else. Everyone carries something heavy. Some carry bills. Some carry responsibility. Some carry loneliness. And some carry pressure that no one else can see. The woman beside him shifted slightly again, her head pressing more comfortably against him. She let out a small breath, almost like a sigh of relief. He didn't move. For once, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow's meeting or next month's expenses. He was simply present. A stranger giving another stranger a moment of peace. He didn't know that this small decision, to stay still, to be patient, to let her rest, would soon become the beginning of something neither of them expected. But for now, in the quiet darkness of the cabin, high above the sleeping cities below, all that existed was a steady sound of the engines, the soft weight on his shoulder, and the simple choice to be kind when it would have been easier not to. Time passed slowly after that. He didn't know how long her head had been on his shoulder anymore. The plane lights were dim, and the cabin felt calm, almost frozen in time. His arm was stiff now, the numb feeling spreading from his shoulder down to his fingers. Every few minutes, a sharp tingle ran through his hand, but he ignored it. He had learned long ago that discomfort was temporary. Complaining didn't make it go away. A man across the aisle glanced over, noticed the situation, and raised his eyebrows slightly. The single dad met his eyes for a second, then looked away. He didn't want attention. This wasn't something he was doing to be noticed. Another flight attendant passed by, pushing a cart quietly. She slowed when she saw them, then gently turned the cart slightly so it wouldn't bump into his elbow. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She nodded with understanding. He appreciated that more than words. The woman beside him slept deeply. Her breathing stayed steady calm. It was clear she hadn't planned to rest like this. Her body had simply given up. He wondered how many nights she had gone without proper sleep. His thoughts drifted back to his own life. Before his son was born, sleep used to be something he took for granted. Late nights didn't matter. He could rest whenever he wanted. But after becoming a single parent, sleep turned into something rare and valuable. There were nights filled with fever checks, school project deadlines, and quiet worries about the future. There were also nights when he sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at unpaid bills, asking himself how everything had become so heavy so fast. He shifted his legs slightly, trying to ease the pressure without disturbing her. His shoulder protested, but he stayed still. A soft announcement came to the speakers, reminding passengers to keep their seatbelts fastened. The captain's voice was calm, almost soothing. She stirred again at the sound. Her head moved just a little, sliding closer to his neck. He held his breath for a moment, afraid she might wake up and feel embarrassed. But she didn't. Instead, she relaxed even more. He noticed faint dark circles under her eyes now. Up close, she didn't look untouchable or powerful. She looked like someone who carried too much responsibility alone. He wondered if she had children, or parents she worried about, or people who depended on her decisions every single day. People often assumed that those who looked successful had easy lives. He knew better. The flight attendant returned a few minutes later with drinks. When she reached their row, she hesitated. "Sir," she whispered softly, "would you like anything?" He shook his head slowly and raised a finger to his lips, glancing at the woman sleeping on his shoulder. The attendant smiled and nodded, moving on without another word. That small moment warmed him. Kindness, he thought, spreads quietly. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a call. He quickly silenced it, his heart racing for a second. What if it was something important? He waited a moment, then carefully took his phone out again. It was a neighbor, probably just an update. He typed back instead of calling. "Everything okay?" A reply came a few seconds later. "All good. He's asleep. Don't worry." Relief washed over him. He slid the phone back into his pocket. He leaned his head slightly against the seat and closed his eyes, though he couldn't actually sleep. He stayed aware of every small movement, every shift of her weight. Time felt strange, slower than usual. Eventually, the numbness in his arm became painful. He flexed his fingers just a little, wincing silently. He considered waking her gently. Maybe it was time. But just as he thought that, she let out a quiet sound. Not a word, just a soft breath, almost like a whisper. Something about it made him stop. He remembered how his son used to fall asleep during car rides, his head leaning against the window. How careful he always was not to wake him, even when his own body ached from holding an awkward position. This felt similar, so he stayed. A few rows back, someone laughed softly at something on their screen. Another passenger coughed. Life continued around them, unaware of the small moment happening between two strangers. After what felt like a long time, the plane hit light turbulence again. The seatbelt sign flashed on. The cabin shifted slightly. This time, she woke up, her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. She blinked, confused. For a split second, she didn't understand where she was. Then she felt it. Her head was not against her seat. It was against his shoulder. Her body stiffened immediately. She pulled back, sitting upright in one quick movement. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with embarrassment. "I didn't mean to. I must have fallen asleep." "It's okay," he replied calmly. "Don't worry about it." She looked at him closely now, clearly expecting annoyance. Instead, she found none, just a tired man with kind eyes. "I really apologize," she said again. "That was inappropriate." He shook his head gently. "You were exhausted. It happens." She pressed her lips together, unsure what to say next. Her cheeks were slightly flushed. "Thank you," she said finally, "for not waking me." He shrugged lightly. You looked like you needed rest. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it. That's an understatement. She straightened her jacket and glanced around, making sure no one was staring. Then she turned back to him. My arm goes numb if I sleep like that, she said quietly, nodding toward his shoulder. He smiled for the first time since they met. Mine already did. Her eyes widened slightly. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said, but it didn't feel right to wake you. There was a pause between them. Not awkward, just thoughtful. Most people wouldn't do that, she said slowly. Maybe, he replied, but some would. She studied him again, this time with curiosity instead of embarrassment. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the situation. I'm glad I sat here, she said softly, more to herself than to him. He nodded, not sure how to respond. She opened her bag and took out a small bottle of water, taking a sip. Her hands trembled just a little, like someone who had been running on empty for too long. I've had meetings nonstop for weeks, she said suddenly. I didn't even realize how tired I was until I woke up. He listened without interrupting. Sleep finds you when you stop fighting it, he said. She smiled faintly. That sounds like something learned the hard way. He looked out the window again. Most things are. Another quiet moment settled between them, but it felt different now, warmer. She wasn't just a stranger anymore, and he wasn't just a tired passenger. Something had shifted. Neither of them knew it yet, but the rest of this flight would no longer be ordinary. After that short conversation, the cabin settled again. The engines hummed steadily, and the lights stayed low. The woman leaned back in her seat, holding the water bottle with both hands, as if it helped keep her grounded. He sat quietly beside her, his arms slowly waking up from the numbness. They didn't rush to talk. There was no pressure to fill the silence. It felt respectful, like both of them understood that the moment they had just shared didn't need explaining. A few minutes later, the seatbelt sign turned off. Some passengers stood to stretch or reach for their bags. A few walked down the aisle toward the restroom. He flexed his fingers again, feeling the last of the pins and needles fade away. You okay? She asked, noticing the movement. Yeah, he said. Just need a minute. She nodded. Thank you. Again. He gave a small smile. You already said that. I know, she replied. I just don't usually get kindness from strangers. At least not without something attached. He looked at her, curious but careful. Like what? Expectations, she said simply. People want favors. Access. Time. He thought about that. Sometimes people are just tired, he said, and someone notices. She looked at him for a long moment, then looked away, as if that answer landed deeper than she expected. The plane continued smoothly for a while. The cabin crew moved quietly, collecting cups and checking seatbelts. Most people were relaxed now, lost in movies or sleep. Then, without warning, the plane shook. It wasn't violent, but it was strong enough to make a few passengers gasp. A low murmur spread through the cabin. Overhead bins rattled softly. The seatbelt sign turned on again. The woman beside him straightened in her seat. That was sudden. He nodded. Feels like turbulence. Another jolt followed, slightly stronger. A child a few rows ahead began to cry. Someone laughed nervously. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm and steady, explaining they were passing through rough air and asking everyone to remain seated. They both buckled their seatbelts. The shaking eased for a moment, then returned, this time in short, sharp movements. Drinks rattled on tray tables. A few people grabbed their armrests. He noticed a man across the aisle clutching his chest. At first, he thought the man was just scared. But then he saw the man's face turn pale. His breathing became shallow, uneven. Hey, the woman whispered, following his gaze. Is he okay? I don't think so, he said quietly. The man suddenly slumped forward. The woman gasped. Oh my! Before she could finish, he was already unbuckling his seatbelt. Stay here, he said calmly, already stepping into the aisle. A flight attendant noticed at the same time and rushed over. Sir, please stay seated, she said automatically. That man's in trouble, he replied firmly, pointing. The attendant looked, her expression changing instantly. "I need help," she called out. Other attendants moved quickly. One knelt beside the man. Another asked nearby passengers to give space. "Does anyone have medical training?" Someone called. "I do," he said, stepping forward without hesitation. The woman watched him, surprised. "You do? Basic first aid?" he said over his shoulder. "From years ago." He knelt beside the man, speaking calmly to him. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. He checked the man's breathing, then looked up at the attendant. "He's breathing, but it's weak. We need oxygen." The attendant nodded and reached for an oxygen mask. He placed 2 fingers on the man's wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was fast and uneven. Passengers watched in silence now. The cabin felt tense, like everyone was holding their breath. The plane shook again, but no one paid attention this time. "Sir, try to breathe with me," he said gently, even though the man's eyes were still closed, slow and steady. The oxygen mask was placed over the man's face. His chest rose and fell more evenly after a few seconds. "That's good," the attendant said quietly. "That's good." Another attendant spoke into a phone, likely contacting the cockpit. The woman stood up from her seat, gripping the headrest in front of her. She couldn't look away. She watched how calm he was, how steady his voice sounded. There was no panic in his movements, no rush, just focus. He adjusted the man's position carefully, making sure his airway was clear. He spoke to him again, softly, like a father waking a child. "Stay with us," he said. "You're not alone." A few moments passed. Then the man coughed weakly. A small sound, but it felt loud in the silent cabin. "There," he said, relief clear in his voice. "That's a good sign." The man's eyes fluttered open slightly. The attendants exchanged quick glances, their tension easing just a bit. "You're going to be okay," one of them said to the man. "Just keep breathing." The captain's voice came over the speaker again, informing passengers they were preparing for a precautionary landing to get medical assistance. The tone was calm, controlled. A few people whispered to each other. Some looked scared. Others looked relieved. He stayed kneeling until the man was stable enough to be moved slightly. Only then did he step back, allowing the crew to take over. The woman finally sat down again, her heart racing. When he returned to his seat, she looked up at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "You didn't even hesitate," she said quietly. He buckled his seatbelt and sat back, exhaling slowly. Someone needed help. "But you stayed calm," she said. "Most people panic." "I've learned that panicking doesn't help anyone," he replied. She studied his face, noticing the slight shake in his hands now that it was over. "You're shaking." He looked down, surprised. "Guess the body catches up later." She reached into her bag and handed him another bottle of water. "Here, thank you." Their fingers brushed briefly as he took it. A small moment, but it felt heavy with meaning. The plane descended slowly. Outside the window, the city lights grew brighter, closer. The cabin remained quiet, respectful. No one complained. Everyone seemed aware that something serious had just happened. The attendants checked on the man again, speaking softly. He looked better now, more alert. As the plane prepared to land, the woman leaned slightly toward him. "I don't know what would have happened if you weren't here," she said. He shook his head. "Someone else would have helped." "Maybe," she said, "but you were the one who did." The plane touched down smoothly. A soft applause broke out among the passengers, not for the landing, but for relief. Emergency personnel waited on the runway. The man was helped off the plane carefully, surrounded by attendants. As passengers waited to disembark, whispers spread. People glanced toward him, some nodding, some smiling. He felt uncomfortable with the attention. He wasn't used to being looked at like that. The woman beside him noticed. "You don't like being seen," she said gently. "I didn't do it to be seen," he replied. She smiled, but there was something thoughtful behind it. "That's clear." The doors opened. Fresh air rushed in. The journey was far from over, but something had already changed. For both of them. He didn't know it yet, but the calm he showed in that moment would stay with her long after this flight ended. The plane stayed on the ground longer than expected. Passengers remained seated while medical staff finish their work. The cabin felt different now. Quieter, slower, like everyone had been reminded that life could shift in a single moment. He sat back in his seat, hands folded, staring at the seat in front of him. His heart had finally stopped racing, but his thoughts were still moving fast. He replayed the moment again and again, wondering if he had done everything right. Beside him, she watched him from the corner of her eye. She had met many people in her life. Confident people, loud people, people who spoke about their achievements before they spoke about anything else. But this man was different. He didn't seem interested in attention or praise. If anything, he looked uncomfortable with it. That stayed with her. After a while, the captain announced that the flight would continue after refueling and clearance. Some passengers groaned softly, but no one complained loudly. It felt wrong to complain after what had just happened. When the plane finally began to move again, the engines humming once more, she turned toward him. "You okay now?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how fast things can change," he said honestly. One minute, everyone's tired and bored. The next minute, nothing else matters. She leaned back in her seat, exhaling slowly. "I think we forget that too easily." They sat quietly for a few moments. The tension from earlier had faded, replaced by something calmer, more open. "I never even asked," she said gently. "Are you traveling for work?" "Yes," he replied. "Just a short trip." She nodded. "I am too. Or, I was." He glanced at her. "Was." She gave a small smile. "I might delay a few things after this." He didn't press for details. He had learned that people shared more when they felt safe, not questioned. She noticed that. "That's rare," she said suddenly. "What is?" he asked. "You don't push," she said. "Most people do." He shrugged lightly. "Everyone's carrying something. I don't need to add weight." That answer made her look down at her hands. For years, she carried the belief that strength meant control. Tight schedules, clear authority, no room for weakness. It had helped her succeed, but it had also isolated her. And now here she was, sitting beside someone who had shown more strength in silence than most people showed in speeches. She cleared her throat. "Can I ask you something personal?" He turned toward her. "You can ask." "How do you stay like that?" she asked. "Calm, even when things go wrong." He thought for a moment. "I wasn't always," he said. "Life taught me." "How?" "I became a single parent," he said simply. Her expression softened immediately. "My child comes first," he continued. "When you're responsible for someone who depends on you completely, panic stops being useful. You learn to breathe through things, one step at a time." She nodded slowly. "That makes sense." She hesitated, then asked, "Is it hard?" He smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. Every day. There was honesty in his voice, no drama, just truth. "But it's also the best thing that ever happened to me," he added. "It gave my life direction." She looked out the window, watching the clouds drift past. "I've spent years chasing direction," she said quietly. "I thought I found in success." "And did you?" he asked. She paused. "I found purpose, but I lost peace." That answer surprised her as much as it surprised him. She wasn't used to saying things like that out loud. "I run a large company," she said after a moment. "People expect me to have all the answers, to never slow down." He nodded. "That sounds heavy." "It is," she admitted. "I can't remember the last time someone let me rest without wanting something in return." He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "You fell asleep because your body trusted the moment." Her eyes filled slightly, but she blinked it away. That's a kind way to put it. The cabin lights brightened a little as the plane reached cruising altitude again. The world outside looked peaceful, unaware of the lives moving through the sky above it. "Can I be honest with you?" she asked. He nodded. "When I woke up earlier," she said, "I felt embarrassed, but I also felt safe, and that scared me." "Why?" he asked gently. "Because I don't usually feel that," she replied. "Not with strangers. Not with anyone." He considered her words carefully. "Maybe safety isn't something we control," he said. Maybe it just happens when we let our guard down. She smiled faintly. You say things like that very easily. I don't, he said. I just say them simply. She laughed softly at that. They talked more after that. Not about big achievements or titles. About small things. Favorite meals. Early morning routines. Childhood memories that stayed for no clear reason. He told her about making breakfast for his child every morning, even when he was exhausted. How those quiet minutes mattered more than anything else in his day. She told him about waking up before sunrise, checking emails before she even got out of bed. How silence had become uncomfortable for her. Listening to each other felt natural. There was no rush, no performance. At one point, she asked, "Do you ever regret the life you didn't have?" He thought carefully before answering. Sometimes, he admitted, but regret doesn't build anything. Responsibility does. That answer stayed with her. As the flight continued, she realized something else. She felt lighter, not because her problems were gone, but because she wasn't carrying them alone in that moment. When the plane finally prepared for its final landing, she felt a strange sense of disappointment. She wasn't ready for this conversation to end. The wheels touched down smoothly. Applause filled the cabin again, softer this time. As passengers stood and reached for their bags, she remained seated for a moment, watching him. He stood up, stretching slightly, then reached for his suitcase. "Listen," she said, standing to, "I don't usually do this." He turned toward her. "But I'd like to stay in touch," she said. "Not because of what happened, because of who you are." He hesitated, not because he didn't want to, but because life had taught him to be careful. She noticed. "No pressure," she added quickly. "I just didn't want to let this moment disappear." He studied her face. There was no expectation there, just sincerity. "Okay," he said finally, "we can stay in touch." Relief crossed her face, quick and genuine. They exchanged contact information quietly, without ceremony. As they walked off the plane together, surrounded by strangers rushing back into their lives, neither of them realized just how much this connection would matter. But both of them felt it. Something had shifted again, not in the air this time, but inside. The airport felt louder after the quiet of the plane. People rushed in every direction, dragging bags, checking phones, chasing connections. The moment they stepped into the terminal, life seemed to switch back on at full speed. Announcements echoed overhead. Screens flashed departure times. The calm bubble they had shared in the air slowly faded into the noise. They walked together for a short distance without speaking. At the end of the jet bridge, they stopped. "This is me," he said, pointing toward a different corridor. She nodded, suddenly unsure what to say. She wasn't good at goodbyes, not when something felt unfinished. "I'm glad we met," she said. "Me too," he replied honestly. They shared a small smile, then turned in opposite directions. He didn't look back, not because he didn't care, but because he had learned not to hold on to moments too tightly. Life moved forward whether you were ready or not. The ride home was quiet. He sat by the window of the bus, watching the city pass by. Neon signs reflected on the glass. People came and went at every stop. He thought about the flight, the emergency, the conversation. It all felt unreal now, like something from another life. His phone buzzed. A message. "I hope you got home safe." He smiled. "Almost there," he typed back. "Thank you for checking." 3 dots appeared. "Thank you." The reply came, "For everything." He put the phone away, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't expected. At home, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. He set his bag down and walked into the kitchen. A small note was stuck to the fridge, written in uneven handwriting. "Dinner was good. I saved you some." He stood there for a moment, reading it twice. Then he smiled. He reheated the food and ate slowly, thinking about how much he missed his child when they weren't around. Even one night felt long. After cleaning up, he sat on the couch, exhaustion finally catching up with him. His phone rested on the table beside him. He thought about the woman from the flight, not in a romantic way, but with curiosity. She felt like someone who had walked into his life for a reason, even if he didn't know what that reason was yet. Days passed. Work returned to normal. Meetings. Deadlines. school drop-offs, grocery runs. Life moved forward in its usual rhythm. But something had changed. He felt calmer, more grounded, like the world wasn't as heavy as it used to be. They exchanged messages now and then. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Sometimes just a simple check-in. Other times a short conversation about the day. She told him about slowing down her schedule, about canceling a meeting that wasn't urgent, about taking a walk without her phone. He told her about helping with homework, about learning to cook a new meal, about small wins that made big days feel manageable. Weeks went by. One afternoon, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Hello." "Hi," her voice said. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No," he replied. "I just got off work." There was a pause, then she said, "I've been thinking about you." He waited. "And about what happened on the plane," she continued. "Not just the emergency. Everything." "I have too," he admitted. She took a breath. "I wanted to ask you something. And please feel free to say no." "Okay. My company is opening a small community-focused project," she said. "It's meant to support families, not just make profit. We need someone grounded, someone who understands responsibility, not just numbers." He frowned slightly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you'd be perfect," she said. He was silent, not because he didn't hear her, but because he didn't expect this. "I don't have a fancy background," he said carefully. "I'm not a corporate person." "I know," she replied. "That's why I thought of you." He leaned back in his chair, processing her words. "I'm not offering charity," she added quickly. "This is real work, with fair pay, flexible hours." His mind went to his child, to school schedules, to being present. "What kind of role?" he asked. "A leadership position," she said, "but a human one. You'd help shape how we treat people, not just how we earn money." He laughed softly, almost in disbelief. "That's a big offer." "It is," she agreed. "You don't have to decide now." They ended the call not long after. He sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Later that evening, he tucked his child into bed. "Did you have a good day?" he asked. "Yes," the boy said sleepily. "Did you?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Yeah, I think I did." That night he barely slept, not from worry, from possibility. A few days later, he agreed to meet her, not in a boardroom, not in an office tower, in a small cafe near a park. She arrived early, dressed simply. No assistants, no phone in her hand. They talked for hours. About values, about balance, about building something that didn't burn people out. She listened more than she spoke. That told him everything. He accepted the offer, not because of money or status, but because it aligned with the life he wanted for his child and himself. Months passed. The project grew slowly, thoughtfully. People noticed the difference. Employees felt seen. Families felt supported. Work felt meaningful again. He had more time at home, more evenings at the dinner table, more mornings without rushing. She changed too. She led differently, spoke differently, lived differently. Sometimes they met to discuss work. Sometimes they walked to the park and talked about nothing important at all. There was no rush to define what they were to each other. They were simply present. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned soft shades of orange and blue, she looked at him and said, "I still can't believe everything changed because I fell asleep on your shoulder." He smiled. "I almost moved." She laughed. "I'm glad you didn't." He thought about that flight, about the small choice to stay still, about how kindness often goes unnoticed, but never without impact. Some moments don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, and if you let them, they can change everything.